Welcome to episode 25 of the Strategic Momentum Podcast. I'm your host, Connie Steele. Business development is an important function in many organizations, but interestingly enough, many people don't have an agreed upon understanding of what it is, or they may have a narrow view of the value it brings. But not today's guest. John Keeling, SVP of Business Development at the Motley Fool, has had a unique career journey. He's been an academic, started a web development company, held product management leadership roles, all before being a business development executive. Because of his diverse experiences, he inherently has a different mindset and approach to BD. John shares his perspective on this interdisciplinary mindset that has guided him in his role, as well as what BD professionals can and should do to be successful. And success, as he will tell us, isn't focused around closing deals. The value business development can bring is so much more than that. Thanks so much, John, for joining us today.
My pleasure.
So let's talk about your career journey, as it's certainly been one that has had quite a few interesting pivots along the way.
Well, as Emerson said, life is a journey and not a destination. And my destination in adulthood started out on an academic path. In undergrad, I was a double major in accounting and English. I think the former was to please my left brain parents, and the latter appealed to my creative side. I was at Virginia Tech for my undergraduate program, and I decided I wanted to become an English professor. And I had my sights on getting a PhD in literature. And so that's the path that I was on. But in my last 2 years at Tech, I got involved in something called the Blacksburg Electronic Village Project, which was the university and town's effort to connect to the internet. This project led me to get involved in running computer bulletin boards for the engineering and English departments and do some research on technology and long-distance education. So a couple of years later, I was packing up to head to California and Stanford University to work on a PhD in literature. And I had this vague idea about getting involved in educational software. So that Blacksburg Electronic Village project had sort of changed my orientation, but I still wanted to be an academic. And landing in California in 1992 was kind of perfect timing for someone interested in software and networks. I was able to do my coursework in literature and participate in Stanford Center for Design Research to develop educational software alongside folks from computer science department, education department, and so forth. And then on the side, I started a website development company with some friends. We had a bunch of great clients like Apple and Cisco, Netscape. And we developed a popular site at the time called the Real Beer Page, which was a microbrew enthusiast site. We also ran the website for the San Francisco International Film Festival every year, which was a ton of fun. So long story short, I was working on my dissertation in literature, but sort of this educational software project on the side, and then the website development business that I was also doing on the side was booming. So I decided to put my academic career on hold and jump into website development full time. So I had to call my mom and tell her that I needed to put Stanford on hold because I was more interested in helping microbrews and other companies go online. It was an awkward phone call.
Oh, I'm sure she loved that.
She did. She got over it after a few years, but at first it was a difficult period. And so anyway, I continued down the path with the website development company, but in a couple of years, my co-founder and I couldn't really agree on where to take the company. So at that point, I decided to make the decision to move over to Netscape, who had been one of our clients, and go to work for them full time. At Netscape, and then later AOL, when AOL acquired Netscape, I was always in a hybrid product management and business development role. And from my perspective, I've always viewed these two roles as similar with slightly different points of emphasis. And that's kind of been true of my career in business development at the Fool over the last decade or so. You know, when I was at Netscape, Jim Barksdale became CEO. Did you know Jim at all?
I did not.
Okay. Well, Jim has a lot of colorful sayings and stories associated with him. And one that always struck with me, and I think it's sort of relevant to the journey that you talked about, was the following. He said, if you see a snake, kill it. Don't play with dead snakes, and all opportunities start out looking like snakes. And by that, I think he means, snakes are problems, but don't let them fester. Don't endlessly complain about them. Squash them and move on. And once they're dead, Don't continue to debate and blame your current situation on old problems. Move on. And recognize that all opportunities start out looking like problems. To solve the problem, then an opportunity will emerge that you couldn't even see before. So I think my career and kind of the twists and turns I described has all been about looking for snakes to kill and finding opportunities that emerge when you solve a problem.
Very interesting. And I'm assuming, Netscape was one of your clients when you had your web development company, then you work for them. It was a natural transition to move into that product management role, given your experience in building website experiences at that time.
That's right. I mean, I think when you're starting a company, of any sort, you're really starting out building a product, a product or a service. And so you have that mindset. With Netscape as a client, I was sort of an extension of their product team. So when I went over to join Netscape, moving over in that role was a perfect fit.
And then tell me how that pivot to where you are now, where you head up business development for Motley Fool, occurred. Again, because you had mentioned you were in product management at AOL and also had BD responsibilities. But then how did you make that full transition?
Based on my experiences at AOL, which again, were kind of a hybrid product in business development role, when I left AOL to move to Motley Fool, it was actually for more of a pure product management position. But as I said, I've always kind of approached them as very similar roles with slightly different points of emphasis. So I think when you're in business development, you're a little more focused on studying the competitive or partner landscape from a perspective of what's driving growth outside your company. From a product management perspective, I think you're a little more focused on the problem your product is trying to solve and how successful you are at creating value for your users. So two different points of emphasis, but I think incredibly valuable to kind of cross-pollinate to improve both the efforts on the business development and on the product management side. So when I joined the Fool, I was helping build a platform for the Fool in what they anticipated would be more of a pure product management role. But I've always kind of had this hybrid mindset. So, I was also doing more business development related activity, developing partnerships and distribution opportunities for the platform we were building. And in so doing, my colleagues at the Motley Fool kind of recognized that business development at the Fool, that business development function really hadn't been given enough priority. And we had a lot of partners and distribution partnerships that really needed to be reinvigorated. And we thought there was a lot of opportunities to do more in that area than what we were doing. So that's ultimately what led to me transitioning to more of a business development role full time.
Well, so you've been an academic, an entrepreneur, a product management and BD executive. What do you feel you've learned most about taking a very multidisciplinary approach to your career?
I would say that sometimes it takes an interdisciplinary approach to drive innovation. There's a story I love about the Goldcorp gold mine. Do you know it by any chance?
I do not.
So there was a CEO of Goldcorp, a guy named Rod McEwen, and he was running an unprofitable mining business in Canada. Goldcorp owned the mineral rights to the Red Lake Mine District in Ontario. And there was a bunch of evidence to suggest that there was a mega load of gold in the mine, but the Goldcorp team was unable to find it. And I don't know if you know much about mining. I didn't prior to hearing this story, but each time you do an exploratory dig, it's extremely expensive, millions of dollars. And so Goldcorp, with its expert team, had been doing exploratory digs and coming up, disappointed in terms of their ability to extract the gold profitably. And making matters worse for McEwen, he didn't really come from a mining background and had very little engineering expertise. His background was he was a gold investor for Merrill Lynch before becoming the CEO at Goldcorp. But while at Merrill Lynch, he'd been inspired by attending a conference about the open source development of Linux. So he decided to take an open source approach to mining at Red Lake. He ended up digitizing all of their geological data and he put it on the internet. And he announced a $500,000 prize for anyone who could help them to profitably extract the gold. as you might imagine, the internal team at Goldcorp thought it was a waste of time, and they thought that McEwen was crazy. But as it turns out, he got all kinds of submissions from folks in the industry, from students, from folks in the military, and lots of interest both inside and outside of the mining industry. And the winning submission was from a team that had developed an oil and gas modeling software, and they adapted their technology to help the challenge at Goldcorp and help them locate the gold. And over the following years, Red Lake and Goldcorp became one of the most profitable mining businesses in history, in large part based on some of the technology that they gained from this sort of open source initiative. So that $500,000 investment ended up driving $6 billion in value in terms of what the company was ultimately able to do. So getting back to your question, I think the moral of the story here is embrace the value of an interdisciplinary mindset. Look around when you're trying to solve problems to get perspective, and don't be so focused on your current tactics or a current approach to solving a problem that you don't open yourself to new novel approaches to solving the same problem. And it doesn't always obviously have to be as dramatic as bringing in external people from different domains to help you analyze your business problems. What I was talking about before with the two different mindsets of BD and product management, I think they're also kind of that same reflection of an interdisciplinary mindset to your job and getting problem solved.
The story illustrates how an interdisciplinary mindset can offer new insights and value. By reframing it and seeing it through different perspectives, you get novel approaches to familiar problems. And that's how John sees business development being valuable and productive, as he's always looking for his team to see the potential in doing things differently. And with this mindset comes an inherent understanding of the relationship between business functions. It highlights the importance of working together and not in silos. And as John will tell us, because when you're operating with a limited purview, you're just increasing the risk of misalignment. And that's a common challenge between the BD, product, and marketing teams. From his point of view, whatever BD may be prioritizing, if it's not aligned, it's a distraction and it won't be well supported. So even if a partnership is a worthy opportunity, it can still become a distraction that's destined to fail. That's what bad business development looks like. So what is good business development? Hint, it's so much more than getting deals done. So let's talk about your role, specifically leading business development at Motley Fool. And as a member of their executive management team, what do you feel BD's role is in moving the business forward, not only in your company, but for any company, given that you've got a different mindset, I think, on how to approach this?
In my role, I focus on three key strategic areas: technology, distribution, and growth. And by growth, it could be user, revenue growth, etc. My success in each area is dependent on the interdisciplinary mindset we've been talking about. Finding novel approaches to an old problem or to new opportunities. And also being able to drive alignment within our organization. So when I fail, it's usually because I'm a distraction from the work that my product and business teams need done. And I think that's what bad business development looks like. It's distracting ideas, poorly conceived, and even more poorly executed. But when I'm successful, I'm usually starting from a shared business goal with other internal teams. And it really starts with that clear understanding of what is the business goal? Is it, optimization of a current model, innovation, disruption of a current model? What is that clear definition of the problem we're working on? Then I work in a collaborative way to provide a proper evaluation of a new opportunity. How do we forecast what that opportunity could bring? What level of investment we have to need to make into that opportunity? And then how can we develop a test and learn approach that we're able to get information fast, as they say, fail fast and often, and then figure out how to invest in what demonstrates potential for success. So, I think it's like 1/3 innovation, 1/3 selling and driving alignment, and then 1/3 execution.
So it really sounds like you're shifting from a top of the funnel function, which I think a lot of organizations probably still look at BD as more of a sales function, kind of a siloed sales function, to really this true strategic business partner, as you talked about, focusing on the core business goals to then determine ultimately the necessary strategies and collaborative work dynamic with other teams in the organization.
I think that's right. I think there needs to be cross-functional alignment between business development, product, and marketing groups. It can't be siloed, as you said, because if BD operates in a silo, then I think you're just increasing the risk and even making it likely that you're going to identify lack of alignment, and then, as I mentioned, bad BD becomes a distraction from other teams' priorities. So I think you need to drive alignment, and then I think at an organizational level, you need to make it as fast and cheap as possible to innovate. And I think that is so key and often not nearly prioritized enough.
So it's so interesting that you talk about BD being a critical partner for innovation, and then finding ways to help the organization learn quickly through failing fast. Why don't you think most organizations would never perceive BD to even have that potentially ability? Given your experience in product management, it completely makes sense. But I'm not sure that I think many people would view BD to help in that way.
Well, like you said, sometimes I think BD is sort of narrowly defined in a particular sales role. And so, then I think you put BD in a very sort of constricted function defined for a particular sales goal. And so then you're not going to drive innovation in that way. And I think you're really limiting what business development can be for your company. So I'd say, the typical mistakes are either you're too narrowly defining the role so that it's never going to innovate. It's just going to serve your current sales goal for a particular, business that you've developed. Or you don't necessarily confine business development that way, but you create an organizational structure that's siloed. And, as we discussed, whenever you have that sort of siloed organization, then it makes alignment more difficult. It creates a lot of distrust, lack of transparency, creates a situation for people to be territorial, and it just makes it a lot more difficult for product teams and business development teams to collaborate.
And do you think some of this lack of alignment is that mindset of not being collaborative and open? We talk about, or at least so the dynamics in business today is to be more open, agile, flexible, but the reality to facilitate that type of culture is to break down these silos.
Yeah, we talk about being more agile, flexible, open, but I don't know that we're always truly executing very well on that. So I think it's become a part of the vocabulary, but I don't think organizations are always truly optimized to be, the things that they aspire to be. And when you're siloed, for example, I think people tend to have a kind of narrow view of the value that comes from a partnership. And whether it's internal partners, BD, product management, marketing, engineering, and so forth, or even with external partners. And so, the narrow role of value is when you're thinking about what's in it for me, that kind of zero-sum game of how can I win and you lose. I know it's cliche, but I think I'm always looking for the win-win. How can we invest in each other so that we both are successful? And that's truly understanding, what the assets that both parties are bringing to the table, again, whether it's internal groups or external groups, and how they can invest in each other so that they're both successful.
John's role at The Fool is about technology partnerships, distribution partnerships, and growth. He's never viewed his role as being transactional or narrowly defined. But he's also focused on new horizons and new opportunities, essentially identifying, evaluating, and selling those opportunities internally. Those relationships across the organization, the trust and transparency that he has to maintain to get the alignment is so crucial for John and his team to be effective. Further, the ability to not only analyze that opportunity, understand its potentials and risks, but also the right way to test, evaluate, and prioritize is a critical skill that helps drive that alignment. This all leads to John's point.
So I think you need to drive alignment. And then I think at an organizational level, you need to make it as fast and cheap as possible to innovate.
And at the Fool, business development is a key partner in driving that innovation engine by helping to identify how to invest in testing ideas in an agile way so that the company can stay nimble, fail early, and fail often. And that's a result of establishing these mutually beneficial relationships, which means understanding and creating this value exchange. Let's let John tell us a little more about that.
I think there are three things that you need to do in order to have great value exchanges and great collaborative working relationships. And so again, I think it's the shared problem identification. Is everybody working to solve the same problem? And is there agreement on that? In so doing, shared opportunity assessment. As opportunities come down the pike, we don't just see the opportunity, but we've evaluated it. We understand what the potential outcomes are from investing in that. Everybody's in agreement on that. We understand what it takes to invest in that opportunity. Related to that opportunity evaluation, there are always obstacles, to pursuing a new path, pursuing an opportunity to solve a problem. Do we have a shared strategy for dealing with those obstacles? Shared problem identification, shared opportunity assessment, and a shared strategy for dealing with any obstacles. I think that's the playbook. I think if you do those three things, then you have a successful partnership. If you don't do those three things, then that creates risk and partnerships can fall apart.
So another thing I want to talk about is a word that you used earlier, which is this notion of this value exchange. And one thing that I gleaned from, the work that you do, tying to this notion of helping the organization learn fast and fail fast, is this ability to probably bring in insights from outside and being close to, the customer and the markets, and that insight that can help the internal teams with understanding of the data, understanding what works, what doesn't, so that they can determine what will align with their customers and what won't.
Right. So, Goldcorp, look for those fresh new perspectives to help you solve a problem. And they can come from anywhere. They can come from an organization. They can come from anywhere in the organization. So don't necessarily look at people's jobs and titles and so forth. Just seek out that fresh new perspective to help you solve a problem. As I mentioned before, in that value exchange, have a clear understanding of the assets and the investment that both sides are attempting to make and their goals for those investments, and support each other. Here at the Fool, we have a board member, Kip Tyndall, who was the founder and CEO of the Container Store. And Kip has this wonderful expression. He'll say, once he decides to do business with someone and partner with them, he'll say, let's see who can do more for each other. It's really this idea of, again, not what's in it for me, but who can do more for the other person? How can we invest in each other so that we're both more successful than we would be independently? And it's just broadening your mindset, not just to narrowly, the opportunity for you, but the opportunity for your partner. And the more we can make each other successful, the more, it's going to come back and drive success for ourselves as well.
I love that mindset that you mentioned, because it's not just that mindset that would exist externally as you're looking to form new relationships with potential partners, but it's also that mindset internally and ensuring that all the teams are working truly collectively together, because that's so critical to have that speed to market that most companies need today.
It's so true. And early on in my career, I had a lot of colleagues, even mentors, who were maybe more mercenary, and they knew what winning looked like to them, and they marshaled all of their energy and focus and skills and talent on achieving that goal, and they could be quite successful. But I don't know that success then multiplied within the organization. If anything, they were feared. They created a lot of friction in the organization, burned out the culture. And so over time, I recognized that, and I started to see alternative approaches, the approach of someone like Kip Tyndall. And I saw how that kind of servant leadership, as they say, really created a different dynamic. Still, the outcome could be winning for talented servant leaders, but it went beyond the individual servant leader and their contributions, and it created a whole culture of servant leadership across the company that just, exponentially created better outcomes than one talented, willful person who's burning through an organization to meet their goals.
Right. So it's almost sounding like it's that person having this mindset of winning for me versus winning for we as a collective.
That's right. That's right. And I think it's a fundamental shift that an organization benefits from when they foster that approach internally. I've been lucky to be here at the Fool for the last 13 years. We're very much, I call it a learning organization. Our culture is all about being students of business. We start, studying successful companies as part of the investment research that we provide as the Motley Fool, providing people with, investing and stock advice. But we bring those learnings back into our corporate culture for experimentation. And that's been one of the biggest ones, is that, much more collaborative approach to solving problems. It's not about the individual, but it's about driving value collectively.
So, John, what other recommendations do you have for other business development leaders in terms of helping them break through, challenges that we've mentioned?
We've talked about how some people think of BD as sales-oriented or narrowly defined. We might say transactional. I do a lot of deals. A lot of what I end up doing is putting together agreements, partnership agreements, deals. It can be viewed as very transactional. Viewing it as transactional can be a trap to that mindset where you're not really looking at investing in a value exchange. You're focusing on what can I get out of it? How can I achieve my goals? And I think a lot of young entrepreneurs, a lot of young people in business development, as we discussed, that's what they're focused on. They're focused on their goal and their definition of winning. And if you can have, a broader mindset of understanding that value exchange, the assets that, you're bringing together with your partner and the goals you're both trying to achieve, and your responsibility to invest in helping them achieve their goals so that they, will invest in your goals, you're going to have a better outcome. It feels like, you're taking maybe some of that focus and energy on your goals and distributing it across someone else's goals, and that's going to somehow decrease the probability that you'll be successful. The opposite is true. You'll increase the probability of your success, and you'll be successful potentially beyond your original objectives if you could take more of that value exchange type of approach.
Great insight. And any additional words of wisdom?
Well, first of all, I'd say I love the word wisdom. I think for most people, they focus on the idea of the wise person who's benefited from experience. Learning and expertise are obviously critical ingredients to wisdom. But I love the Socrates line, wisdom begins in wonder. And to me, this says that wisdom is recognizing what you don't know, speaks to, that lifelong learning, a learning organization of trial and error, of curiosity, applying your experience and learning through your curiosity. And that creates a wonderful and wise feedback loop. Not to get too new agey on you, but I think a key to what you call in the name of this podcast, strategic momentum, is really a mindset. We've talked about that. It's a frame of mind that I think you can nurture. There was a psychology of science study out of Canada, and they had two groups who were testing their ability to recognize patterns in seemingly random strings of numbers and letters. So they seemed random, but there was actually a pattern that could be detected and decoded and described. Prior to administering the test to one group, they had them read this absurdist literature short story by Kafka, the author of The Metamorphosis, where a man wakes up one day to find he's transformed into an insect and now is experiencing the world in an entirely unfamiliar way as a bug. Then they had the other group just read a regular, newspaper, realistic type of piece. The Kafka group's scores were much higher. They were much more successful in recognizing the patterns and decoding them. So why is that? I think the kind of cognitive priming that the Kafka story generated got people into kind of a heightened state of awareness. And I can give you an example from my own life. When I wanted to learn how to draw, because I'm terrible at drawing, I bought a book called Drawing on the Right Side of the Brain. And one of the early exercises in that book was to take a familiar picture, like a painting or a photograph, and turn it upside down and then draw it. And you should try it. The act of turning something upside down that's familiar makes it less familiar. And when you're trying to recreate it, you start to recognize detail that you would never have seen before. And so you start focusing on capturing that detail, and you ignore the whole because you can't even really see the whole. But the result, in my experience, was it was the most realistic and sort of best drawing that I'd ever done trying to capture something. But before I turned the world upside down, as it were, I couldn't really see the forest for the trees.
So it forced you to just fundamentally think in a different way.
We're in our kind of everyday stress way of interacting in the world. You stop recognizing certain detail. So things that you can do to kind of reset your mind, to take what seems familiar and make it unfamiliar. That's the interdisciplinary mindset, right? Taking a new frame and putting it on a problem space. And when you do that, details emerge, the relationship between things, change, and you have fresh insight. And so there's a lot of approaches you could take to trying to do that in your own life. It's, again, learning new disciplines, bringing in people who have fresh perspective, turning things upside down, whatever it takes to defamiliarize so you see things from a fresh perspective.
And Professor Keeling, knowing what you know now, what specific advice would you tell your younger self?
Read more absurdist literature. Just take more chances. I think that's cliche, but I certainly think it's true in my own life. Take more chances and read more absurdist literature while you're doing it.
And finally, what's the best way listeners can connect with you?
LinkedIn, or they're always welcome to reach out to me. My email is jkeeling, KEELING @fool.com.
Thanks so much for your time today, John.
Thank you, Connie. It was a pleasure. I enjoyed it.
When it comes to business development, it's all about the value exchange between your key partners internally and externally, because the best learning and momentum comes from these reciprocal relationships. It's focusing not on the transaction, but really winning together. And the playbook is simple: shared problem identification, shared opportunity assessment, and a shared strategy for dealing with any obstacles. You'll increase the probability of your success and even beyond your original objectives if you can emphasize the value exchange in your approach. Thanks for listening to the Strategic Momentum Podcast. You can connect with John on LinkedIn or reach out to him via email at jkeeling@fool.com. If you like what you heard, please subscribe to the show on iTunes and leave us a review. This is what helps others find the podcast. You can also find us in the Google Play Store, Spotify, and Stitcher Radio. And if you want to hear previous episodes or get show notes from this episode, you can also visit us on our podcast page at flywheelassociates.com/podcast. I'm Connie Steele, and you've been listening to the Strategic Momentum Podcast.